evening, everybody. How y'all doing? Good evening. This is going to be a great night. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, April. I have to tell you a quick story. I was at one of the very first Open City events. I was 12, don't worry, and probably underage here at Cliff Bell's, I'm sure. But I like to say that I was here with, well, it was Claire Nelson and Liz Blondie at the time, the only two white people who would come to Detroit 8 years ago. They were bold, they were brazen, they still are. And it wasn't really sexy to come to Detroit. So we're gonna make it our intention tonight to not make the conversation of social entrepreneurship sexy, right? Because we do that. But what we are gonna do is dig into this as a concept of, I like to say a concept, I can't see not one person but this man down here. Now that, yeah, okay, y'all help me. Don't let me fall. That's your job, not to let me fall. But this idea of what does it look like to do good and make money at it. Imagine that. So that is sort of the value proposition that drives me at Lips and Hips. Organic lip gloss available in back in the corner there. Yeah, selfless promotion, April. We all got to do it. All got to do it. And then I'm joined by a really esteemed panel, two of whom I know, and this gorgeous woman in the middle, Passion. I'm gonna let them introduce themselves, but would you join me in just, man, what a day. I know they had a busy day. Join me in a really warm welcome for Pete, Passion, and Carla. Give them a lot of energy, a lot of Open City energy, please. Excellent. And then I thought what we might do, rather than me rattling off their bios, I thought maybe you all would take just a minute. I'm going to start with Carla, right? Just a quick minute, introduce yourself, and then pass the mic. How about that?
Okay, sounds good. So my name is Carla Henderson. I am Executive Director of Pony Ride. But I also, when I returned back to the city of Detroit in 2009, Claire and Liz invited me. I was the City of Detroit building official. And I remember sitting in the middle next to PJ from Lager House and the gentleman who owns Fran's, and they were being asked, what did it take to open your business? And so for a good hour, they went on and on and on about the city and the building department, and I sat there. Those hot lights, I mean, I just felt like I am just getting set up. But it was a valuable lesson, and a lot of the work that we started in the department came from this forum. So it's full circle for me to be back here this evening.
Welcome back. Passion?
Hi, I'm Passion Murray. I started a composting company called Detroit Dirt back in 2010, somewhere around there. I was under the radar for a couple of years, but I get the years mixed up. But my main objective is organics diversion, diverting waste from the landfills and repurposing and reusing that, getting corporations really to analyze their waste streams. And so Detroit Dirt was kind of the baby steps, the first few steps of my waste to energy path. So I'm happy to be in Detroit with Detroit Dirt. And it's funny because I remember being at Open City about 5 years ago when Carla was here. So it's funny how things go full circle.
My name is Pete Benedetto. I'm the director of Michigan Corps, an organization based here just up in Midtown. We have a couple of programs that we're currently running. One is Kiva Detroit, which is a micro-lending slash crowdfunding platform for small businesses. We're crowdsourcing interest-free loans for small businesses with that program, which is actually an international one, and we're operating it here locally. And then the other major program we have is the Social Entrepreneurship Challenge, which is a statewide competition for startup and early stage social enterprises. We run the statewide competition trying to build the social enterprise movement, and then we have a training program aimed at connecting these social entrepreneurs to impact investment, which is investment aimed at achieving social aims. So happy to be here.
Thank you. It's really an honor to have you all here. It's also an honor to be in this beautiful building and amongst such a landmark establishment. Let's be sure that we're gracious to both our host and our servers this evening. And thank you to whoever decided that everybody ought to get a free drink. But please do know that that costs. So take care of your staff. So Pete, I had an opportunity to judge the Social Entrepreneurship Challenge a couple years in a row, and one of the things that really inspired me was that Elizabeth Garlow and other folks that had worked, yourself included, kind of came up with this definition that the social entrepreneur had a willingness to prioritize social impact over profit. So it wasn't one versus the other, but a willingness and an ability and a desire, really, to prioritize. In case you're wondering, I'm not tweeting. I'm checking my notes here. Why does she have her phone out like that? Because we have a very tight agenda, and I wanted to make sure that we got some good questions in. So tonight's event is, called Open City, Be the Change. And so I really want to, what's that mean, right? Like we of course quote Gandhi a lot, be the change you wish to see in the world. But Carla, maybe you could start off with what does be the change mean to you, and how is it currently informing your work over at Pony Ride, another phenomenal establishment here in Detroit?
So thank you. So be the change to me is to make something or view something differently. And I am not a social entrepreneur by any means, and I'm not an artist. I mean, I give kudos to those who are. But what I see my role is now is how do we not only help support the entrepreneurs that are in Pony Ride, support the Pony Ride community, and then go outside of the walls of Pony Ride and support the community at a greater good. And just recently, we had the editors from Martha Stewart in town, and they wanted a dinner because they were putting this American Made contest. This is one of the winners, but the dinner was, reaching out to this entrepreneurial network and saying, hey, come talk about your business, enter this contest. And they were blown away by what was happening in Detroit. So I guess I view it as making some of the connections that are necessary to kind of help support the good work that's going on in the community.
Thanks. Passion?
Sure. Wow, if someone up here on the stage knows about change, being the change, I've definitely experienced that in my journey. It's like environmental justice and social justice kind of is like the moral fabric of what I do. So socially, economically, and environmentally, I had to go and knock on doors for GM, all the major Blue Cross Blue Shield, which are now clients, and try to get them to embrace sustainable practices. Because I think in the beginning, when you approach people and you go, hey, I want your food waste, it's like, that's change on a whole nother level. It's like, what the hell do you want with my food waste? But that was kind of the way for me to break the barriers to get people to see that something as simple as food waste. And then, of course, I can't, the Detroit Zoological Society can't go unrecognized because getting their herbivore manure, which is another important ingredient in what I do. But compost in itself, it's like the soil is the soul of the people. It's the skin of the earth.
Okay, somebody tweet that. The soil is the soul of the people. Now that is it.
But I couldn't go in preaching. I had to go in and display character and get people to really see what, changing the dynamic of the mind, getting people to truly see that something as simple as recycling, that we could take that same resource and repurpose it and distribute it back into the community, to get people to see that you should grow your own food, or at least understand the root of it, And so I always tell people at every conference and workshop that, not only am I standing on the shoulders of my ancestors, I think that's, within the soul or the moral fabric of the world, this is something that goes unnoticed sometimes. But thank God for the UN, because recently they slated 2015 as the year of the soil. So to me, that was very divine, because I'd been, kind of like on the bandwagon of so many people who are doing this well before I came along, but Detroit was the perfect place to get this model off the ground because we were at ground zero here in the city, so this was the perfect place to introduce this closed loop system of recycling and empowering people. Yeah. You feel like you want to answer that question too?
Sure, I'll take a crack at it. So we actually saw this question beforehand of what does it mean to you to be the change, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was a philosophy major in college, so all of a sudden I'm like asking the most deep existential questions I've ever asked myself, and like, what am I really? Who am I?
Yeah, I have that tendency to ask those kind of questions.
But it was actually really helpful, and so what I kind of landed on, which is just one thought on this, and appreciate others, of course, that being the change for me means living / working in response to a social problem or to a social injustice that one feels. If that makes any sense, I'll try to take that down a little bit. But people experience things in a different, in their daily lives, and that's what we ask our social entrepreneurs in the competition to do is to. One of these points in the definition that Yodit mentioned, one of those points is that the social entrepreneur addresses a clear social problem, and we don't give a list of social problems. I think there's probably, unfortunately, an infinite number, and everybody recognizes them and deals with them in their own life in a different way. And that's part of what Marcus mentioned, this being a movement, and that this is always going to evolve and this is going to grow. What it means to be a social entrepreneur, and I think that's part of what makes it powerful and part of what makes it beautiful. But that's really like what I would condense that down to is it's a response. So not just seeing not just seeing work as a means of acquiring income or acquiring profit, but the business addresses a felt need. For instance, the problem of recidivism in many communities across the U.S. So we have one of our competition winners was On the Rise Bakery, which was originally founded 8 years ago by the Capuchin monks over on the east side. So they started this business out of the desire to employ guys who were coming out of the prison system who didn't have the opportunity to access employment. So they created a bakery, but the real aim was to create an opportunity for employment. That's kind of what I'm talking about in terms of thinking in terms of response to a problem.
I think that's great. As questions are percolating for you, don't forget that you have some index cards and pens on your tables, and there'll be a beautiful young woman walking around collecting them from you shortly, and then or a handsome young man, AKA Marcus. I have been in your seat, both as an entrepreneur and just as an audience member, on panels where the picture is painted so rosy, and what I would, and it just is like tomorrow you could just quit your job and you could become a social entrepreneur and you could solve the world's problems, and yet we all know that that's not the reality. So one of the other questions that I asked the panelists to think about was to share the challenges that they have experienced. I know that's really helped me when people have been willing to do that. So would you jump in on sharing in no particular order?
Okay, I would definitely say regulatory issues that come up, having 18 years of municipal experience. People come up with these ideas like composting, and there may not be zoning for it, there may not be a business license for it, and so just understanding that you may hit a brick wall when it comes to that. Definitely, it's hard to start any business and to have the social enterprise as your primary kind of driver. Sometimes it's difficult to communicate the message of what it is you're trying to accomplish with your social entrepreneur business. So I would say being able to come out and say, is it providing jobs for those returning back into the community? Because I remember when Rebel Nail came out, and I love their product, but I was like, what? I couldn't really understand what. So you make jewelry and the graffiti and okay, so now I got it. But I really at first couldn't, quite honestly, figure it out, and somebody had to kind of explain it. And then I would say space. We hear the story, Detroit, all these vacant buildings, but really, I know we have a 200+ waiting list at Pony Ride, people trying to get in. space is hard, particularly affordable space.
Two mics. Challenges, man, I have more than a few, but I would have to say, to Carla's point, when I first started composting, I was kind of sneaking around doing it under the under the radar, because the city, I'd spent months going back and forth to the city, and there really wasn't an ordinance around. And one day, the city attorneys and inspectors, and I don't even remember how many people showed up on my site, and my eyes are already big, but I'm pretty sure they were huge when I saw all of them show up. And I was completely honest with them, and I had to really think fast about how I could explain what I was trying to do, because in past history, people had tried to compost in different ways, and it didn't go well. It was really about the money, about taking the waste in and getting the money. But I had to explain to them the model is already a closed loop model, so it was like socially, economically, and environmentally. I had to show them that I wanted to save corporations money, I wanted to use this space, and I was going to take good care of the 2 acres that I was on. And whenever they showed up, I was going to be on my best behavior, and it was going to be clean. And the city attorneys ended up saying, you know, if we could have more people like you, even though we don't have ordinances in place, this is a few years ago, this is what it's really about, because not only are you trying to help bring change, you want to save corporations money, but you want to make a product out of this and create jobs. But one of the hurdles that sticks up, the obstacle that sticks out most is when I go into these corporations, they never have any money. We don't have a budget. I'm like, well, then you don't have me in this program then, because how in the hell are we going to get this off the ground if you don't have a budget? But you seem to have budgets. If I study corporations and companies and their history, and if you can allocate dollars for things, other things, then you should be able to allocate funding for what I'm trying to do. So I don't believe in traditional ways of going about getting funding anyways, because I had other companies, I grew up in an entrepreneur family, so that was like the baseline for me anyways to evolve as an entrepreneur. But funding and trying to get people to really see the long-term vision, because most people within the vision that they have is kind of short-term. You know, everyone's not an entrepreneur. They don't have a vision of 10 years, 15 years down the road.
Let me follow that thought through with you, because I think you're onto something that could be really powerful for the audience. So you said you don't really follow traditional funding practices. Could you spend a little time there, say a little more about that?
I never created a plan for the bank with this particular company, because this was about, you know, social justice, environmental justice, and, you know, climate change. And I didn't want to walk through the door talking to people about climate change or waste to energy, because some of that language was foreign when you started saying, oh, we could have in-vessel units and the solar can
We're right there. We are right there. Some
it's
of
like,
this
it's far out.
For
so,
sure.
You know, the banks traditionally, and I've had conversations, I was telling Carla this, I just accepted an invitation to be a part of the Circle of Entrepreneurs for Credit Suisse, which is a private bank. And so now it's like these private banks are starting to recognize that there's a divide. You know, that in a city like Detroit or Oakland, you know, Atlanta, different cities, there's this divide, this black and white divide, you know. And I grew up in Grand Rapids originally, so I have just as many white friends as I have black friends, and they're all of value. But the steps that you take as an entrepreneur when you're building a business plan, you got to be ready for people to just say no. You know what I mean? Because it comes down to collateral. Do you have collateral? What are your assets like? What do you? And it's like, you know, years ago, I said, you know what? Maybe a foundation might see the value of me, but I'm going to just pull my bootstraps up and kind of, it was a shoestring budget for me. It really, it wasn't, I didn't take that traditional route of going into a bank, because quite frankly, white, black, whoever, most of my friends never really got a $500,000 or $250,000 loan from the bank. Not to say that they don't exist,
Right.
but you kind of have to be, it's like the cart and the horse. Either you have to be established and have some type of collateral, or, you know, you have to have come from money, or the job that you work for 10 or 15, the job that you work for 10 or 15 years, maybe you saved enough money to make it happen. So, you know, funding and social change were my, you know, obstacles, and they still are. Some markets in this country are a lot more further along than others, you know?
Yeah, it's a great point. And having been in economic development and small business development for, you know, the last 15 or 17 years, I think you would be surprised to know things like more than 70% of entrepreneurs don't have a college degree, started on money that was under $1,000. You know, that sometimes, and I think this is particularly true with women and with people of color, our own limiting beliefs can get in the way of us marching and working towards our dreams. Now, is there inherent and institutional issues? Yes, there are, but I really appreciate you saying that you didn't allow those things necessarily. You worked around them, and I have found that to be my experience as well. And someone else brought up, and Pete, I'll come back to challenges from you, but somebody else brought up something that I think is in line with funding, and I feel like I see a lot of this happening in the social entrepreneurship space, and that's bartering. So could you all, Pete, maybe you could start by talking about, obviously, maybe you have, if you're a hustler like these women are and myself, maybe you have, but could you talk about either your own experience or even what you're seeing amongst the cohort of social entrepreneurs you're working with in the use of bartering, the tolerance for or the willingness to use that as a tool to build capacity in your business? You seeing any of that? Those favors, those trades, those I scratch your back, you scratch mine, and I'll make you a website, you build mine, yeah?
Sure. As a tough question. What I would say is, like Carla, I'm more in the business of supporting social entrepreneurs. I would say that I'm a social entrepreneur myself. But I can speak to what I see amongst the social entrepreneurs that I work with. Which is, to this point of bartering, I'm going to take that to the kind of the larger case, and I think there's a ton of it here in Detroit. It's a great environment for it, which is collaboration among social entrepreneurs. I think that the small business community here in general works and plays together very well. I mean, events like this, the Build Institute, great examples of that, of the way that people collaborate and support one another. And I think social entrepreneurship lends itself even more to that, because when you recognize each other as equals in terms of both wanting to accomplish social impact in probably in different ways, but both recognizing that and seeing that as each person's priority over monetary gain, all of a sudden it brings you closer to one another. So what I've seen amongst, for instance, our social entrepreneurs that we've worked with, is we had this, this cohort of about 10 social entrepreneurs, one of whom is here today, a guy named Jeff Adams with Artesian Farms, one of our first year's winners, or fellows. That closeness brought them together. So there's one guy with a business who he takes old laptop computers at Eastern Michigan University. He teaches teenagers there to fix up those computers, and then they sell them. So it funds their training program. So you have these teens in the Ypsi area learning computer skills and hardware development skills. And so what he then did is another one of our social entrepreneurs, Amy from Rebel Nell, she was in need of computers for the women in her own company. She said, hey, she just asked him a question, hey, where can I get those? What do you recommend for buying computers? I think it was a week later, she gets home and there's a box of computers sitting on her doorstep. And that's the type of thing where there's this exchange of services, exchange of goods. That's a pretty concrete, unique example. But that openness to people, for you to recognize the strengths of the resources of another and to recognize your own resources and to make those available to folks. And I think that really lends itself to what you're saying about bartering.
Thank you. I also, you brought up a good point. You bring up Jeff Adams, who's building a large sort of hydroponic business. You bring up, I forget his name, but the computer retrofitting business. And I am inclined to also think about businesses like Zingerman's, right? So I think sometimes there can be the implication that a social enterprise is more like a nonprofit than it is like a for-profit, or that somehow there is so let's clear the slate, that the only difference between nonprofits and for-profits is where the profits go. They're both expected to run like businesses, and the same is true. I'm seeing your heads nod, but I want to confirm or invite you to chime in on this, that the same is true with social businesses as opposed to traditional businesses, that the distinction, and there are a few, is simply the willingness or the ability to prioritize social change over purely profit. So in some ways, it is more philosophical, right? It's more of a notion, an idea, a way of being, a spirit, a culture of an organization. So I think about, I always joke with Ari and Paul Saginaw, the founders of Zingerman's, I call it like the $65 million corned beef sandwich, right? And really, it's $65 million. No, it feels like it. Or say Whole Foods, or you know, these are, so I just want you to give yourself permission to think about social businesses or social impact ventures as being both the compost business or community garden or social impact real estate, and also multi-million-dollar businesses. And I also want to encourage those of you that are starting the smaller businesses to aim, which was the point I think you were getting at, for that longer vision of growth and scalability. Yes? So that leads me, I think we talked a lot about challenges, and I certainly want to hear from our audience. But there was one other piece for me. Sometimes it feels like, maybe there is something different between social entrepreneurship and traditional entrepreneurship, and certainly that somehow it's happening differently in Detroit than anywhere else in the world. I'm gonna tell y'all, I went all the way to Africa and they knew about Detroit, and it's the only place I've been, to Ethiopia, where they're the only country in Africa to not be colonized, and that is the only place I saw the swag that I see here in Detroit. But somehow, and so maybe talk about, all of you are well-traveled, all of you have a breadth of experience. How are we doing social entrepreneurship, or what's so great about Detroit and how we're doing it?
You want to go first?
I'll go first. Well, you're absolutely right. When you travel to other places and they recognize Detroit, especially a place like Ethiopia, when we start talking about civilization and history, but that's a whole nother conversation. But but Detroit, as a child, I'll go back, I was always attracted, to the city, being from the West Side. I always thought, how can I make a difference in the city? Because I went to undergrad at Texas Southern in Houston, and so when I came back, I wanted to be close enough to my family, but I wanted to make a difference here. But the one thing that I learned along the way, and I can credit a lot of things, going to church, playing sports, social capital is as much I don't want people to think that just because I don't follow the traditional path of funding or seeking capital, but social capital is just as important, because it was like, I'll give you an example. When Ford decided, Team Detroit, let me credit Team Detroit, creating that commercial, I was in this commercial, and when it went viral, there were more people who were interested in, they were so happy that something positive was being said. There was a positive light being shined on Detroit. And by the way, it was like this black woman with this afro in a Ford commercial was just weird altogether. People were just kind of like, how did that even happen or whatever? But thanks to Toby Barlow and the crew. But the thing is, Detroit, for so many people, no one wanted to see Detroit fall by the wayside. They didn't want to see the heartbeat of Detroit die. So people around the world, I started getting emails from people who were saying the most uplifting, and it was just so spiritual, because so many people were saying, we believe in Detroit and we didn't want it to happen, and what can we do? You know, what can our school do? What can our students do? What can, you know, so I think that, you know, Detroit has an imprint on the world, not just the car, but we're talking about music, we're talking about some of the most, you know, profound and gifted people who came out of the city. And so, you know, we can talk about jazz, we can talk about a lot of things. We had an imprint on the world. So a lot of people value Detroit as this gem. We just got a bunch of dirt, you know, kind of piled on top of us, but I'm handling that in my own way, the dirt. You know, trying to get people dirty all around the world in a whole different way. But Detroit has its imprint. It has its swagger, as you mentioned. The D is the D. No one can take that. Period, point blank, period, you know.
And let the church say amen. Thank you for that, Passion, and I know why your mama named you Passion. Give her a round of applause. Several times we've mentioned funding, one of, beyond a mission, right, and a clear value proposition, defined by your unique niche in the marketplace, the problem you're going to solve, and how you're going to get at it. Funding is huge. Let's talk money, y'all, and then I think we're going to open up for some questions. So I think there's a few things I want to talk about. You know, by day, I'm the Chief Relationship Officer at a nonprofit. We're operating and trying to move towards a fully sustainable model, which means we're deriving our income primarily from fees and services as opposed to grants. I want to be really transparent about when I say funding, like, can you talk about that mix? Can you talk about where, you know, what, maybe not who, but where your diversity of revenue is coming from and what your challenges related to funding are?
Sure. So the one thing I did want to add about the city of Detroit is that I know Phil talks about it takes a village to open up a coffee shop, and really because we're really forced to work together because we have such limited resources. And so I get to pony ride. I've been on the board for 3 years, and you know, we are losing money. And you know, I think Phil, his philosophy is, you know, we just want people to come, try out the space. It's okay to fail. And so then I looked at the rents we're charging, and all of most of the tenants are like, you know, we could pay more. We're doing quite well. We don't have to advertise because people come through, they buy our products. And so we're kind of trying to work together. So we put this April Boyles on it, advisory board together that's gonna meet with all the tenants to kind of gradually get them, because we have a number of them that are, frankly, need to relocate to a bigger space, which is a great problem to have. But what I find with the funding is, I think you made a great point. When I look at like social capital, I mean, people come to me now and say, I want to open up a pony ride, how'd you do it? When the Night Challenge, Cities Challenge grant, Katie Locker emailed me like, oh my God, everybody wants a maker space. How did you do it? And I said, gosh, we don't even have the time to document it. I mean, it took probably anywhere between 275,000 hours of volunteers coming for the last 3 years for pizza and beer and wine and knocking down walls. I mean, we can't really put a price on that. So we're trying to create what we feel is a sustainable model, but a lot of it was just really volunteers, the community, people just coming and giving us a night. We still do volunteer nights every other week on Wednesday evenings. I have a group coming from Chicago, Place Labs, coming next week. They want to volunteer for volunteer night. So so the funding can come in many ways, but I'm not saying that everybody's going to just jump on and be there for your when you're deconstructing the walls. But for us, it was just a constant, the community supporting it. So it was a different kind of funding. But I'll tell you, the foundation world is very unique, and having just started at Pony Ride in July, I went around, I talked to Jim Boyle, and okay, so what is the perception of Pony Ride and how hard was it to get these grants that we do have. And they said, I remember Jim Boyle saying it was the hardest grant, and it was probably best you didn't have your 501c3 because we use Southwest Solutions as our fiduciary because, because we've kind of done things very non-traditional. And so it's not, funders don't feel, even though they want to bring their tours and they have conferences, they want to come to Pony Ride to show space, but the financial investment is not really there. And so we're working hard to hopefully change some of that.
Yeah, just in the essence of time, no, thank you. That was really helpful. And I do want each of you to respond. So if you can, can you jump in and give us some, a response on funding and how that's all going for Michigan Core and Kiva and.
Yeah, I'll speak more to the kind of the funding situation that the social entrepreneurs we work with are facing. Because I had actually a relevant conversation about that today, which is for a social enterprise, when you're growing slowly, a lot of times intentionally growing slowly because you're prioritizing your social impact, whatever that is, over your financial gains. So you're taking your time in gaining revenue. It's a little bit hard from a social entrepreneur's perspective as to where they turn for funding. The traditional funders aren't typically interested in a company that's intentionally growing slowly. And then the foundation community isn't necessarily interested they're coming around, I'd say, but not typically interested in investing in a business or supporting a for-profit business a lot of times. So from the social entrepreneur's perspective, they're wondering, where do I turn for that capital? And one of the things that we have found, which is most effective, and this seems a little bit backwards, but somebody mentioned it before, which is the power of relationships at that stage. Because social entrepreneurship, in some ways, I'd say it's a new movement, but it's been happening for generations. But because it's a new term that people are just starting to use probably within the last 10 years or so, so people are a little bit confused by it. But when the relationship with partners is there, then it can be effective. So as an example, I'll give one of our winners and fellows from this past year, which was City Girl Soap, which is based up in Pontiac, originally based in the northwest part of Detroit, moved up to Pontiac. It's a social enterprise that creates soap, laundry flakes made from goat's milk, and they're really all about training youth in business and entrepreneurial skills. So again, startup business, doing well, very popular product, selling in Eastern market. But where do they turn for funding? Well, one of the options they said, again, a lot of people are, funders always have some type of response in terms of you're not far enough along in these ways. But the United Way, which is a very forward-thinking organization here in town, said you want to do an internship program to train youth in business skills. We are all about youth and we're all about education. So they partnered with them and they said, let's create a program to do that. So that partnership, all of a sudden they're becoming more, City Girl Soap, the soap company, is becoming more sustainable because of the partnership that they formed, because they realized the aligned interest between themselves and a larger organization. And I think that's one of the keys to funding are those partnerships.
How many entrepreneurs are in the house by hand?
It's pretty entrepreneurial.
Well, yeah, it is. I just have a few things. Know your value, because you are the funding. So when you walk through the door, know what you're doing you're an important part of the equation. Your relationships are one thing that's of value. It's like when I got Team Detroit to they provided some pro bono work for me to kind of bring about the awareness. That actually helped me get through the door with GM and Blue Cross to do presentations, because they kind of made me bigger than what I was for about 3 or 4 years ago. So we kind of have to understand that funding has to be equated. You have to know the value of your relationships through social capital, but you also have to be able to understand the equation that you're presenting. So whatever business that you're involved in, you have to understand what that value is to the person that you're sitting in front of. for me, it was, I don't really give a damn about you, but I care about your children. So while you're spending all this money on all these other things, I'm trying to get you to understand that this is about 20, 30 years down the road for your children. So for me, it was basically analyzing who I was going in front of at the time, and just trying to get them to see, because funding is not always, the dollar, because the dollar means something different in every market around the world. But really, it's about who you are, what you're trying to do, and you studying who you're going in front of. Because if it's a foundation, understand before you even get there, if they're interested in media, it's like the Knight Foundation sits on, they donate a lot of money to my program at MIT. I'm a fellow at MIT in the Media Lab. So for me, I had to figure out what the Media Lab really meant. I had to figure out who at General Motors was of value to me. There happened to be a guy that was global waste reduction guy. Oh, that's my guy.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like, funding doesn't always come in the traditional way. Your approach is not always traditional, but how you go about getting the things that you need is not always traditional either. You kind of have to, the trade for services and bartering can be a beautiful thing when it's a major or Fortune 500 company.
Right.
You don't always have to ask them for money. You can ask them to make a phone call, which is funding.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's it's a multitude of things as to what that funding truly is. Because for me, it was just simple. It was, I need a couple of trucks. Because I can show you I can create jobs with this, but I just need a little bit of help. Ford, GM, you make trucks, right?
Passion. You almost make me think about, y'all remember, I forget what show it was, but I got 10 jobs, man. I'm Jamaican. I got 10 jobs.
In living color.
In living color, thank you. So I'm going to, it's almost, and part of this I live and breathe is that inherent to the social entrepreneur is like 5 hustles, right? So I heard MIT, I heard Ford, I heard Media Lab, I heard Detroit Dirt, but I do wanna volley just for well, actually there's 2 things. One is I appreciate you talking about. Actually, what I want to know is is Pony Ride now a 501c3?
Yes.
And
yay! Finally, it's been a long time coming.
And Michigan Core is. And Passion, is your organization a 501c3?
No, I just have a .org as a email.
That's fine.
Because
Okay.
Detroit.com was taken.
Sure.
But no, I'm for profit.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's another huge question, and I think that particularly in this state, the question of the L3C versus the 501c3 versus the LLC and any other business designation. And one of our guests asked that question, how can I connect, how can new businesses connect to the services and opportunities of the panelists? And I mean, there is a plethora of experience here, but I almost want to tip you towards Build and the Build Institute and the work that they're doing, because some of those questions can be answered very quickly. I mean, each of them is going to do something different depending on what best fits their business model, but Build and Marcus and April are really here to help out with answering those questions. What I can tell you from my own experience, especially because lots of social ventures and social entrepreneurs tend to lean towards the L3C model because we've all been damaged by the nonprofit model. But frankly, it's difficult to fund that. It's very difficult for traditional grant makers to fund L3Cs. So again, in the essence of time, I want you to talk to Marcus or catch any of us offline. But also, I would, irregardless of your business designation, what I heard and what I would encourage is this idea of diversifying revenue. So I live in the nonprofit world by day and in the social entrepreneurship world by night, and time again, I see a single source of funding. Bam, we landed that grant from Knight, we got that grant from Kresge, we got that contract with Ford, and now we've sort of doubled down on that one agreement, and then if that thing goes away, the idea or the business has collapsed. The other thing, and John Zeraldo, really a legend in the nonprofit sector, thought of as an innovative leader and a real serious thought leader, is here in the audience tonight. Hey, John. And we were talking about, anybody seen Dan Pallotta's video, The Way We Think About Charity is Dead Wrong? It's a TED Talk. If you've not seen it, please write it down. Daniel Pallotta, P-A-L-O-T-T-A. Dan Pallotta was the brains, he and his company, the brains behind the Komen 3-day walk. They were at the genesis of that before, and made roughly, somewhere between $700 and $800 million in the early years of the Komen Walk, and we're a nonprofit. And his argument, and part of what John and I had a chance just to start to talk about today, is how does the sector attract social venture investors? How do we start to up the ante? One of your questions is about, is a triple bottom line business thought of as a social enterprise? The answer is yes. Another question is the social enterprise marketplace ready for a big infusion of capital? I think that one is a hell yes. Others of you want to know, how do you translate emotional support into financial support? And I think the answer is clear, and I definitely want to hear from our panelists, and certainly, any more from you. But how do we move into the business of solving problems, right? And how do we attract, let's just say, like Zuckerberg cash to these type of, raise your hand if you don't want that kind of money to solve your problem. I would like 20 gazillion billion dollars to eradicate the issues of girls and women that we're addressing in my company. But how do we ready ourselves? Because we're not. How do we ready ourselves for social impact investing and this larger scale investment that clearly we need to solve some of the problems we're after? And Carla?
Yeah, I would say by far our biggest tenet in Pony Ride is the empowerment plan, Veronica Scott. And what's interesting about her is that she's hired 20 full-time seamstress. And it's not just about the job. I mean, they do yoga once a week. They have weight loss. I mean, she is addressing, going beyond, in my opinion, just providing them a paycheck. She's helping them so that they don't fall back into the whatever got them in their situation prior to coming to the empowerment plan. And now, in talking to her, she realizes that she's made a product that doesn't just have to serve the homeless. So maybe now she's looking at starting a for-profit business and producing this coat that you could buy at Dunham's and so forth to help support the nonprofit. So but it started, and she'll tell you, it was her 7th version, and this woman yelled at her at the shelter, "We don't need coats, we need jobs." And that was what, for her, changed the whole dynamic for the empowerment plan.
Tweet. Absolutely. Anyone else want to chime in on that? Any other questions? Have you been able to pass your questions over to Marcus? If not, I see one coming. Go ahead, Pasha.
I would say mentorship was key for me. I'm not one of those people who, because I've discovered something, and like you said, Martha Stewart Award, I was an awardee of the American Made, and fellow at MIT, the UN has recognized, for me, I still don't walk in the room thinking that I know as much as I would like to think that I know. Sure. I seek out people who, I don't go to every networking, first of all. Waste of time. I'm an entrepreneur. I work when I'm sleeping. So it's very important for me to understand who's where, and I seek out people. And very strategic, a plan, but mentorship was key for me, because I would always go into a situation like the Suppliers Partnership were a bunch of companies that just kind of came, we all evolved because of waste, including Victoria. John Bradburn was helping her, he was helping me. we kind of started off on the same foot because we were taking something as simple as waste and creating that as a product. So, you know, I think if you are searching and you have a path defined, you have to figure out who in the world can help you elevate your game, help you evolve as a person and as a business. And that was really key for me. Like with foundations, I look at, you know, what if it's an environmental foundation, I'm all in. If it's for something else, it doesn't really pertain to me. So, you know, but funding is, you know, we can have a lot of conversations, but I think now, because so people like us and others in the audience, Detroit is being recognized as a place of resurgence. So people are starting to recognize that there is some issues around funding. You know, when you look at demographics, and now programs are starting to be created because of the issues that we were once hit with. Now, you know, somebody from General Motors will call someone up and say, we'll write a letter for you, Passion or Joe Blow, for the banks or for a foundation if that's going to help you get to where you're trying to go.
I remember having a conversation with Chris Ewell, who's over at Skillman and thought to be doing quite a bit, is doing quite a bit in terms of social innovation. And he was saying, you know, what do you need and how can you help? And by the end of the conversation, he said, you know, I get it. Like my Rolodex is the best way that I can help. So that is also a way in which we can be supportive and accountable to one another, is to open that. And then something else powerful I heard, I've heard it in two different ways. So Steve Harvey, the comedian, says, if you're the smartest person in your crew, you need a new crew. But I heard it slightly more articulately told by Angela Barbash of Reconsider recently, and she said that we are a composite of the 5 people we spend the most time with. And so I would encourage you to think about that. We're in the final 5 minutes or so. It looks like you might have a couple more questions. And those of you whose questions I didn't read, I either couldn't or I couldn't tie it in a way, you know, tie it into our topic, but please do feel free to stop Carla, Passion, or Pete to ask your question. It seems like the unspoken of this panel is community. What is the hallmark of a community that supports social entrepreneurship? And how should we cultivate that? I feel like Scott LaRocca. I think very deeply. Okay, so come on, Carla.
All right. So, from my perspective, the community is what we would call the entrepreneurial community. And for us, and now we have co-working space, which is something brand new for us at Pony Ride. So we've had to adapt to this co-working space, which is not always easy for us because, you know, tenants have their space, it's defined, and now we have 25 businesses / organizations that are coming every day, and, you know, we're kind of used to just moving tables and chairs around and loud, you know, we're a very loud building, and now we have to respect that co-working community. So it's definitely a trial and error for us, I would say, but what we find now is the tenants and the coworkers are starting to like kind of merge their communities. In our coffee shop anthology, we just put a bobcat through the wall, and now we have a beautiful facade that we're building out. And so now this space is like actually becoming a retail space. And it was everybody kind of chipping in, including the people that just rent the space for the tables and chairs upstairs. And so we like it to kind of organically happen. We don't force anybody, but we're definitely starting to see this merger for us at community.
Yeah, I would say back to the point I was making earlier, just the focus on collaboration amongst people and the sharing of resources. We've done an activity in the past when we did kind of meetups as part of our social entrepreneurship challenge, where we had folks just take Post-it notes and say, this is a resource, or this is something I'm in need of, which is, you know, legal help. I don't know how to navigate whether to become a 501c3 or an L3C or an LLC. who do I turn to? And then you have somebody else in the room of 70, 80 people who says, I'm actually a lawyer. I can help you with this, or let me refer you to my attorney. So doing more and more of that, the sharing of resources, I think is key.
I think this is a great question as well. I'm gonna take every last minute. Which area or population of Detroit do you see the least amount of enterprises addressing, and what that could use more attention? So essentially, where are the under enterprised issues or opportunities in Detroit?
Could I jump
Let's
on
just
that?
get one person. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually wanted to.
You want to
to
hear
make-
from more? Okay. Okay.
I wanted to make this point earlier when I said that social enterprise is something that's been around for a long time, but now is being called by a new name, and there's more of a movement, which I think is very important. I don't want to understate that I think the social enterprise movement is worth promoting and worth growing. But it is something that's been happening all the time. So for instance, in my work with Kiva, where I work with any small business of any stripe, helping them to access this interest-free funding, I've come across a number of businesses, for instance, a catering business, just run out of a woman's home in the northwest area of Detroit. And she's just describing her small business to me. I'm not asking for any type of social impact at all. And she said, one of the things I do with my business, as we're growing, is that with my two sons who help her in the business, she makes a full meal, and then she drives that around. She delivers it to the homeless in her area. This is just a typical small business owner, Northwest Detroit. She has probably never heard the term social enterprise, doesn't consider herself a social entrepreneur, but she totally is in my eyes. And there are tons of these across the city. People who are just very community-minded, who do this out of the goodness of their heart, and just see it as part of who they are, an expression of themselves in their business. And I think we can do a better job of telling those stories, of highlighting those people. You do have the people that make the New York Times that end up, on stages, whether in the city or in New York or LA, what have you, and it's wonderful, and they're doing incredible work. But for every one of those, there are 10 who have not been recognized, who are having a tremendous social impact in the neighborhoods of Detroit, and I think we can do a better job of telling those stories.